It was a cold evening in early December of 2022, just after my move into a quiet, middle-class neighborhood on the outskirts of Minneapolis, Minnesota. I had rented a modest two-bedroom home, something comfortable enough for myself while I worked remotely. The neighborhood had a friendly atmosphere. Neighbors waved politely and occasionally stopped by for small talk. Overall, I felt secure. It was precisely this feeling of safety that made the events of that particular night so hauntingly unexpected. I'd spent that evening working late in my home office, situated toward the back of the house, overlooking the fenced backyard. My concentration was abruptly shattered by a sudden chill that crawled up my spine, as though someone had opened a window behind me. Turning slowly, I noticed nothing out of place, yet my instincts were sharply aware that something wasn't right. Shaking off the unsettling feeling, I decided to shut down for the night. I closed my laptop and headed toward the kitchen, preparing a quick snack before bed. As I stood by the counter, I noticed something strange. The motion sensor lights in my backyard flickered on. This wasn't unusual on its own. Wildlife frequently wandered around the property, triggering the lights occasionally. But this time felt different. Wrong, somehow. Nervously, I peered through the blinds, scanning the backyard for movement. Initially, nothing stood out, just shadows from tree branches swaying gently in the wind. But as I watched closer, I realized one shadow didn't move in rhythm with the trees. It stood still, hunched slightly, beside the corner of my garden shed. My heart instantly quickened, adrenaline flooding my body. The figure was unmistakably human, cloaked in darkness. Slowly, it turned its head toward the house, almost as though sensing my gaze. Instinctively, I ducked behind the counter, breathing heavily as I tried to rationalize what I'd seen. After a few tense moments of silence, I cautiously stood up, daring to glance again. To my relief, the figure had vanished. Assuming I had startled an intruder into fleeing, I immediately locked all doors and double-checked every window, my nerves on edge. Finally feeling secure again, I climbed into bed, hoping sleep would erase the paranoia seeping through my veins. I lay awake, tossing and turning as every creak and groan of the house amplified my anxiety. Eventually, exhaustion overcame me, pulling me into restless sleep. But peace didn't last long. I jolted awake suddenly, an intense feeling of dread gripping my chest. Something had awoken me, but in the confusion of sleep, I couldn't pinpoint what exactly. Straining my ears in the oppressive silence, I felt my blood run cold as a faint scraping echoed from downstairs. It sounded unmistakably like a window slowly sliding open. My pulse surged violently, and my body froze in panic. Someone was inside my house. My mind raced frantically. Should I confront the intruder or hide? Fear guided my choice, and quietly, I slipped off the bed, inching toward the closet. I silently eased myself inside, heart pounding, desperately hoping my shallow breaths wouldn't give me away. Moments passed, agonizingly slow, each second punctuated by the distant creak of floorboards as the intruder moved stealthily through my home. My ears strained, trying to follow their movements, when suddenly, heavy footsteps ascended the stairs, one step at a time, with deliberate slowness, almost as if whoever it was knew exactly where I hid. Terror overwhelmed me, every muscle in my body tense, barely daring to breathe. The footsteps halted abruptly, just outside my bedroom door. Silence settled like a thick blanket, suffocating and oppressive. Then, slowly, the doorknob turned, the door creaking open just enough to reveal the intruder's shadowy outline standing perfectly still in the threshold. I bit my lips so hard I tasted blood, forcing myself not to scream. The shadow didn't move at first, just lingered, breathing deeply and audibly as if savoring the fear radiating from me. Seconds stretched into eternity, until at last it took a few deliberate steps into the room, pausing once more, listening carefully. Just as I believed it might finally leave, the figure suddenly approached the closet with swift confidence. Terror clawed at my throat. The closet door flung open violently, revealing a hooded figure towering over me. My breath froze as I stared helplessly up into the darkness beneath the hood. But in that horrifying instant, my intruder stepped back abruptly as though startled himself. Without a word, he bolted from the room, footsteps pounding down the stairs, before the front door slammed shut behind him. Shaken and confused, I called the police immediately, explaining everything through trembling breaths. Officers arrived within minutes, inspecting every inch of the house. To my horror, they discovered signs of forced entry. A downstairs window left ajar and muddy footprints leading upstairs, stopping precisely where I'd hidden. Despite their thorough search, nothing had been stolen, nothing disturbed except my sense of safety. However, the true horror unfolded later, when one officer took me aside privately, speaking in hushed tones. The intruder wasn't a random stranger. They'd caught glimpses of his face on a neighbor's security camera footage. The face was unmistakable, and it still sends chills through me to this day. The man, who broke into my home, who stood inches away from me that night, was my next-door neighbor. The very person who smiled and waved cheerfully each morning as he passed by, whose friendly conversations had made me feel welcomed. The police never found him. He disappeared completely, leaving his house abandoned overnight. Now, every shadow reminds me of him, every friendly smile from a neighbor twisted into suspicion. Because sometimes the true monster isn't a stranger. Sometimes it's the friendly face right next door. It was a warm evening in mid-August of 2020, and I'd recently moved into a quiet bungalow on the outskirts of Boulder, Colorado. The house was modest, tucked at the end of a peaceful cul-de-sac, surrounded by tall pine trees and distant mountain views. At first, it felt like I'd found a hidden gem, somewhere safe and secluded from the chaos of city life. But it didn't take long for that comforting illusion to shatter entirely. Just a week after moving in, I began experiencing unsettling feelings at night. It always started around midnight, a creeping sensation of vulnerability, like unseen eyes watching my every move. I often checked doors and windows multiple times before going to bed, reassuring myself it was nothing but anxiety. Still, the sensation persisted, growing more intense each night. One evening, after an exhausting day at work, I returned home late and immediately noticed something odd. The porch light, which I'd left off to conserve energy, was switched on, casting an eerie yellow glow across my driveway. Assuming I'd simply forgotten, I shrugged it off, entering the house warily. But once inside, that uneasy feeling intensified. The air felt thick, charged with a strange tension I couldn't shake. I walked slowly through the rooms, scanning carefully, looking for anything out of place. Nothing seemed disturbed, so I forced myself to relax, convincing myself it was my imagination running wild. Later that night, as I lay awake in bed trying to drift into sleep, I heard an unsettling sound, a faint metallic scraping coming from outside. It was brief but unmistakable. Instantly, my heart quickened. Frozen in place, I strained my ears, desperate to identify the source. Moments later, a sudden, sharp noise jolted me upright, the unmistakable creak of the side gate swinging slowly open. Panic surged through my veins. Someone was undoubtedly in my backyard. I crept quietly to the window, gently pulling aside the curtains just enough to peer out. At first, everything appeared quiet and empty beneath the pale glow of the moon. But as my eyes adjusted, I spotted movement. A shadowy figure lingering near the back door. My blood ran cold. The figure moved methodically, silently testing doors and windows for entry. Fear gripped me tightly. The thought of confrontation paralyzed my muscles. Hastily, I dialed 911, whispering urgently into the phone as I watched the intruder disappear from view. The dispatcher promised immediate help, advising me to hide and stay quiet. Shaking uncontrollably, I hurried into the bedroom closet, pressing myself tightly into the corner beneath piles of clothing, desperately hoping whoever it was wouldn't find me. Minutes stretched into eternity, every sound amplified in the silence, the pounding of my heartbeat, shallow breaths, and finally, the soft click of a lock somewhere downstairs. The intruder had found a way inside. My entire body trembled violently, eyes wide, staring helplessly at the slivers of light filtering through the closet door. Footsteps echoed faintly from downstairs, moving slowly, deliberately, exploring my home as if searching for something specific. Each step brought the intruder closer to the stairs, and soon I heard them ascending slowly. I bit down hard on my fist, suppressing the urge to scream as the steps reached the hallway outside my room. Everything went deathly silent for several moments until suddenly I heard my bedroom door swing gently open. Through the gaps in the closet door, I saw the dark silhouette slowly enter my room, stopping momentarily to look around. My breath caught painfully in my chest, convinced they could hear the frantic hammering of my heart. The figure moved closer, pausing mere inches from the closet door, standing utterly still, as though sensing my presence. Just as I braced myself for the worst, the intruder abruptly turned away, retreating quietly from the room. Moments later, police sirens wailed in the distance, rapidly approaching. Relief surged through my body as I heard the intruder rushing downstairs, followed by the sound of my front door slamming open, footsteps fleeing rapidly into the darkness. When the police arrived, I emerged, trembling from the closet, shaken but grateful to be unharmed. Officers searched the premises thoroughly but found no trace of the intruder, no fingerprints, no sign of forced entry other than the unlocked back window. Although disturbed, the police assured me they'd patrol regularly, advising me to improve my security system. Shaken, I spent the next few days installing security cameras and reinforced locks, determined to reclaim my sense of safety. However, it wasn't until nearly 2 weeks later, reviewing security footage late at night, that true terror returned. The camera captured a shadowy figure approaching the back door once again. But this time, the intruder lifted their head clearly into view, allowing the porch light to illuminate their face. A cold chill rippled through my body as I recognized the face immediately. The intruder wasn't a stranger. It was my landlord, the same man who'd warmly handed me the keys, welcoming me to my new home with a friendly smile. But the worst realization struck moments later, when I watched him hold up a spare key he'd secretly kept, smiling knowingly into the camera before calmly disappearing back into the darkness, reminding me chillingly that true horror isn't always a stranger lurking outside. Sometimes it's the one person you trusted enough to invite inside your home. It was an icy February evening in 2021, barely 2 weeks after I'd moved into my small ranch-style house in rural Maine. The house itself was cozy but isolated, sitting on the edge of dense woods that stretched out endlessly behind the property. From the start, the quiet had been both peaceful and unnerving. No nearby neighbors, no noise except the distant rustling of leaves and occasional wildlife passing through. But on this particular evening, that silence felt heavier, more ominous than ever. Snow blanketed everything outside, muting even the faintest sound and amplifying my sense of vulnerability. I was preparing dinner in the kitchen, humming softly to myself to break the unsettling silence when I first noticed something odd. The outdoor motion sensor lights snapped on suddenly, illuminating the yard in harsh, artificial brightness. My heart skipped briefly, but I quickly dismissed it as just another deer wandering by. Still, curiosity compelled me to glance out the window, scanning the snow-covered yard. At first, there was nothing unusual, just pure white snow stretching into darkness. But as I looked closer, my blood ran cold. A fresh set of footprints appeared in the snow. Human footprints that emerged from the woods, crossing my backyard and disappearing around the side of the house. Panic surged through my veins. I rushed to double-check every door and window, reassuring myself everything was locked securely. Despite this, my nerves refused to settle, anxiety gripping me tighter each passing minute. Minutes ticked slowly by, every sound making me jump, my ears strained to detect anything out of the ordinary. Eventually convinced it had been a harmless passerby or perhaps a hunter who wandered too close, I decided to calm myself down with tea, settling into the living room to watch something mindless on TV. About half an hour later, just as I started feeling somewhat relaxed, I heard a faint scratching sound coming from near the back door. My stomach dropped instantly. It sounded like someone gently dragging their fingernails down the glass. Terrified, I hesitantly crept toward the sound, heart hammering against my chest. When I reached the back door, I peered cautiously through the blinds. To my horror, standing inches away, illuminated by the pale porch light, was a disheveled man I'd never seen before. His gaunt face was pressed against the window pane, eyes wide and empty, his expression utterly devoid of emotion. I staggered backward in shock, nearly losing my balance. The stranger didn't move, didn't flinch, just continued staring blankly into my home. I quickly grabbed my phone to call the police, but before I could dial, a loud crash echoed from another part of the house, glass shattering violently somewhere near the front. Heart racing, I spun around, realizing in dread that the intruder had deliberately distracted me. He was already inside. I bolted to my bedroom, slamming and locking the door, desperately barricading it with whatever furniture I could move. I called 911, whispering frantically into the phone, barely holding myself together. As I spoke, I heard the intruder's slow, deliberate footsteps moving through the house, calmly exploring, almost as if he were familiarizing himself with the place. Minutes felt like hours as I crouched in terror, listening intently, praying silently for help to arrive quickly. Suddenly, his footsteps stopped directly outside my bedroom door. The silence was deafening. I heard a gentle scratching once again, this time at my bedroom door. Soft at first, then growing steadily louder, more frantic, as though he were desperate to enter. Without warning, the scratching ceased abruptly, replaced by an unsettling silence that stretched painfully. Then, quietly at first, he began whispering unintelligibly, words mixed with faint laughter that slowly escalated into shrill, hysterical screams, filled with madness and desperation. I curled tighter, pressing my hands over my ears, tears streaming down my face, barely holding back screams of my own. Suddenly, the screams stopped, plunging the house back into silence. Moments later, the distant wail of sirens approached rapidly, breaking the oppressive stillness. Relief surged through my veins, and I cautiously peeked through my curtains, catching a glimpse of police lights flashing against the dark, snow-covered yard. Officers quickly swept through my home, reassuring me the intruder was gone, though how he'd escaped unseen remained a disturbing mystery. They found the shattered living room window where he'd entered, footprints trailing through the house, stopping directly outside my bedroom door, then inexplicably disappearing completely. No exit point, no additional footprints. Shaken and deeply disturbed, I agreed to spend the night at a friend's house. But as I packed a small overnight bag, I noticed something lying on the bedroom floor near the door. something the police had missed in their haste. A small, folded piece of paper, left intentionally behind. Hands trembling, I unfolded it, revealing a single sentence written shakily in dark ink. "You looked right at me but didn't see me. See you again soon." Horrified realization washed over me. The intruder had never left. He had hidden himself inside the house, patiently waiting for his chance to finish whatever twisted game he'd begun. Suddenly, a floorboard behind me creaked gently, and I knew instantly I wasn't alone anymore. If these terrifying home invasion stories sent chills down your spine, make sure to like, share, subscribe, and hit the bell icon. Stay safe, and remember, always lock your doors.